She approached a woman in a business suit and said, "I don't have a mom. Can I stay with you, ma'am?" What happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching this video. Eliza Hart woke to the gentle, mechanical hum of blinds retracting in perfect unison, revealing the city skyline beyond the massive glass walls of her penthouse. The horizon was painted in tones of gold and steel, sunlight reflecting off towers she partially owned. Her smartwatch pulsed softly at her wrist, 5 a.m. As always, she sat up, not with reluctance, but with the cold precision of habit. No one was there to greet her, no voices echoed in the luxury of her space, only the subtle whir of temperature-controlled ventilation and the faint clink of her mug as she placed it under the espresso machine. The first sip was perfect, as expected. Everything in Eliza's world was calibrated. Her sleep, her meals, her calendar, even the way the house lights shifted from warm to daylight mode with her entrance into the kitchen. She scrolled through emails on a thin tablet with one hand while flipping through her leather-bound planner with the other. Board presentation at 9 a.m., investor call at noon, flight to San Francisco at 6 p.m. Nowhere in the meticulous planning was there room for variables, much less surprises. In the living room, against a wall of pristine white, hung a single-frame photo. A younger Eliza, eyes shining not with the cool confidence of today, but with something softer. She stood beside a man, his arm around her shoulders, and her hand rested protectively on her belly. The image was frozen in a moment that had once held promise. That photo and the small velvet box inside a drawer she never opened were the only relics of a life that might have been. By 7 a.m, she was dressed in a navy-tailored suit, heels clicking against the marble as she exited her apartment. Her driver greeted her with the usual nod, and she slipped into the back of the black vehicle without a word. Downtown was waking up, the sidewalks beginning to thrum with commuters and street vendors. On the corner of 9th and Hill stood a small cafe, quaint, too rustic for Eliza's world, but one she had grown oddly attached to over the years. Every Thursday, she ordered a particular blend of Ethiopian roast that wasn't even on the corporate catering list. She stepped out of the car and approached the cafe, brushing an imaginary crease from her coat. It was then she saw the girl. A small figure stood near the entrance, bundled in a faded yellow jacket 2 sizes too large. Her gloves were mismatched. One had a hole exposing dark skin beneath. She clutched a worn teddy bear, one eye missing, the other dangling by a thread. Eliza barely noticed at first. Children on sidewalks in downtown LA weren't rare. But then the girl stepped forward directly into her path, her eyes wide and hopeful. "I don't have a mama. Can I spend a day with you, ma'am?" Eliza blinked, disoriented. For a woman whose life revolved around multi-billion-dollar decisions, she found herself utterly unequipped to process what she had just heard. She looked down. The girl's eyes were not pleading, but earnest. They held no manipulation, no drama, just a simple, gut-wrenching sincerity. Eliza scanned the sidewalk, expecting to see a parent or guardian nearby. Nothing. The morning crowd moved past, oblivious. She crouched slightly to the girl's level, caught off guard by the chill in the air. "Where is your mother?" she asked, more to buy herself time than for any real answer. "She didn't come back," the girl replied. Her voice was small but steady. "I think maybe she's a star now. But I just wanted to know what it feels like to hold a mama's hand, even just today." Something inside Eliza shifted. She straightened slowly, her thoughts tangling. Logic dictated she call security, perhaps the police, but her hand didn't reach for her phone. Instead, it hovered midair, unsure. The girl was still staring up at her, silent now, her breath fogging in the cold. Eliza sighed and glanced at her watch. 40 minutes until the board meeting. "Just a walk," she muttered to herself. 15 minutes. And yet, even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The girl's name was Abby. That much she learned as they walked down the block toward the park. Abby spoke like someone older than her 6 years, but with the innocence of someone who still believed in magic. She told Eliza about the teddy bear. His name was Admiral Buttons, and he was a good listener. About how sometimes when the lights went out in the big house with other children, she told herself stories about having a mom who could braid her hair and sing songs at bedtime. They sat on a bench under a sycamore tree, the air sharp and clean. Eliza bought Abby hot cocoa from a food cart, watching as the girl blew carefully over the steaming surface before taking a sip with the delight of someone who rarely got such treats. "Do you come here a lot?" Abby asked, her legs swinging above the ground. "No," Eliza answered honestly. "I don't come anywhere a lot." "Why not?" "Too busy." "That's sad." Eliza didn't respond. An hour passed, then two. The sun rose higher, and shadows shortened on the pavement. Eliza realized with some guilt that she had missed her board meeting. Messages were piling up on her phone. Her assistant had texted, her COO had emailed. She didn't answer. Instead, she took Abby to a bookstore. It was an impulse, but not one she regretted. Inside, the girl ran between shelves like a moth in a field of lanterns. She pulled down books with wide-eyed wonder and stopped at a display of fairy tales. "Do you know this one?" she asked, holding up The Snow Queen. "I've read it," Eliza said. "A long time ago." "Is she nice?" "Not really. She's cold." Abby tilted her head. "Like you." Eliza looked at her, startled. "You look like a queen," Abby explained. "But you're not cold. Not right now." Eliza forced a laugh, though it trembled. "Maybe I'm warming up." They bought the book, and gloves, and a new hat. Eliza justified each purchase in her mind, practical, necessary, short-term. But the girl's delight undid her carefully constructed logic each time. As they left the store, a woman approached from across the street, her badge discreet, her manner gentle but firm. "Miss Hart?" she asked. "I'm from County Child Services." Eliza froze. "We were informed a child had wandered off. One of our staff saw her with you and alerted us." Abby clung to Eliza's side instantly, her small hand curling around her wrist. "I don't want to go back. Please don't make me." The social worker crouched. "Sweetheart, you know we worry when you leave without telling anyone." Eliza stepped between them. "She's been with me all morning. She wasn't in danger." "I'm sure," the woman said kindly, "but we need to make sure she's returned to the shelter safely." "She doesn't belong in a shelter," Eliza said before she could stop herself. The woman looked up at her, eyes steady. "I know, but she doesn't belong on the street either." Abby said nothing. She held Admiral Buttons tightly and stared at the ground. The social worker gently coaxed her toward the waiting car. Before getting in, Abby turned and looked back. "Thank you for the day," she said quietly. "It was my favorite." Eliza stood still long after the car disappeared into traffic. Her phone buzzed again. She finally looked at the screen. 1 missed call from the chairman, 3 from her assistant, 17 emails. None of them mattered. She walked back to her car, carrying a child-sized bag of books and gloves. Later that night, Eliza sat in her kitchen, the lights dimmed, a glass of untouched wine on the counter. The day replayed in her mind, detail by detail, each word and look echoing. She looked at the velvet box she had taken from the drawer. Inside was a silver bracelet meant for a baby's wrist, never worn. She closed the box slowly, then opened a browser window on her tablet. In the search bar, she typed, "How to foster a child in California." She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know what would happen. But for the first time in years, she didn't want to go back to the life she had built alone. And for the first time in even longer, she thought, maybe one day could begin with just one day. The city was quiet as night wrapped itself around the skyline. The sharp outlines of steel and glass buildings slowly softening beneath the haze of December mist. In the heart of it all, Eliza Hart sat alone in her penthouse kitchen, her posture straight, hands folded neatly on the marble countertop. The apartment's ambient lighting cast a muted glow, catching in the reflections of stainless steel appliances and pristine countertops. The glass of red wine before her remained untouched. Outside, far below, car headlights streaked like fireflies across intersecting roads. But in Eliza's world, stillness had settled. She had not returned to the office after her morning with Abby. Her assistant had texted, then called, then finally stopped trying. A board meeting had been missed, a quarterly call ignored, and a personal assistant's schedule collapsed. None of it had moved her. Instead, she had spent hours rewatching the same moment in her mind. Abby's small fingers wrapped around her wrist, her mismatched gloves, her matter-of-fact declaration of not having a mother. That voice echoed now, bouncing in the empty rooms like a ghost that refused to let her forget. She opened a drawer with deliberate care and pulled out a narrow velvet box. It was a gesture she hadn't made in years. The inside held a tiny silver bracelet engraved in delicate cursive with a name that never came to be. There had been a time when she had imagined lullabies, bedtime stories, messy kitchens, and early school mornings. There had been a heartbeat, 12 weeks in, but not much more. A complication, a night in the emergency room, cold hands, and the gentle voice of a doctor who explained kindly that carrying a child again would be unlikely. The man who had promised her forever disappeared before the hospital discharge papers had even cleared. She had packed it all away. Her grief had not been dramatic, not sobbing or broken. It had been quiet, measured, buried under layers of productivity and success. But seeing Abby, holding her hand, hearing her talk about fairy tales and stargazing and imagined mothers, it had pulled that long-buried ache to the surface like a wave unearthing something precious and lost from the sand. By midnight, she was still awake. The search history on her tablet was filled with articles about foster care, emergency guardianship, and adoption laws in California. She didn't know what she was looking for, not exactly. Just a way back, a way forward, a door that wasn't locked. The following morning, she changed her schedule without explanation and drove herself an oddity her staff would note to the county children's shelter on East Maple. The building was a squat, tired structure, sandwiched between a dental clinic and a laundromat, with chipped paint and a crooked mailbox. Inside, the air was warm but stale, filled with the hum of too many voices and not enough space. A staff member recognized her instantly. News traveled fast in LA, especially when someone like Eliza Hart showed up unannounced. They led her down a narrow corridor lined with folding chairs and paper snowflakes taped to the walls. One of the caretakers, a weary woman in scrubs with a name tag that read Janelle, greeted her with professional curiosity and guarded kindness. "She's doing okay," Janelle said, as she guided Eliza into a common room where children were clustered around a TV showing old cartoons. Abby's always had a strong spirit, smart too. She tends to imagine new moms a lot. Sometimes she gives them names, stories. She writes them down in her little notebook. We let her keep it. Eliza's eyes scanned the room and found her. Abby sat on a frayed rug with 3 other children, clutching Admiral buttons in one arm and a piece of paper in the other. She was drawing 2 stick figures holding hands under a giant star. When she looked up and saw Eliza, her expression didn't shift with surprise. Instead, she smiled slowly, as though she'd known Eliza would return all along. Janelle gave them space. Eliza walked over and knelt beside her. "Hi," she said, unsure of how to start. "I thought maybe you got busy," Abby replied, matter of fact, without a trace of bitterness. "I did," Eliza admitted, "but not in the way that means I forgot you." Abby nodded solemnly, as if this was a language she understood better than most. Eliza glanced down at the paper. "Is that us?" "Yes, we're going to a star festival. I've never been to one. You can come." Later that day, after filling out volunteer paperwork and attending a short orientation no one expected her to complete, Eliza signed a waiver that allowed her to take Abby out for the weekend under supervised conditions. It was technically a mentorship program. It wasn't adoption. It wasn't fostering. It wasn't anything permanent. But it was something. Saturday morning brought a new energy into Eliza's world. She picked Abby up herself. The girl wore the gloves Eliza had given her, a new coat that Janelle said had been donated last month, and a smile that lit up her whole face. Back at the penthouse, the space felt transformed by her presence. Abby danced through the foyer, eyes wide at the height of the ceilings, the sound of her laughter rebounding off the stone and glass like birds in flight. In the kitchen, they made pancakes together. The flour ended up on the counters, on the floor, in Abby's curls. Eliza tried not to flinch when batter dripped onto her designer blouse. She laughed instead. Abby drew chalk hearts on the back of the marble island, which Eliza allowed with barely a second thought. They read fairy tales on the couch. They built a blanket fort. Abby sang lullabies with lyrics she half invented. She fell asleep with her head on Eliza's lap and Admiral Buttons resting beside her like a sentinel. Sunday came with quieter moments. They painted tiny wooden stars for a mobile. Abby asked questions, so many questions. Why didn't Eliza have a husband? Did she like cookies or cake more? Was her job hard? Did she ever feel lonely in such a big house? Eliza answered honestly, sometimes too honestly. She found herself saying things she hadn't told anyone in years. About mistakes, regrets, about the pressure of being seen as perfect when all she wanted, sometimes, was a messy day with no expectations. That night after Abby had fallen asleep again, Eliza stood at her bedroom window and called her lawyer. I need to know what it takes to adopt a child in the state of California, she said quietly. A 6-year-old girl named Abby. I'm not sure where I stand legally. I just need you to help me start. The call set in motion a whirlwind of procedures, background checks, home evaluations, psychological assessments, reference letters. The process would take months, maybe longer. But Eliza didn't care. For once, time wasn't the enemy. 2 weeks passed. Eliza visited the shelter every other day. When her schedule wouldn't allow her to take Abby out, they painted together in the craft room or read under the fluorescent lights. She started attending child psychology seminars, hiring consultants to learn more about trauma-informed parenting. She shifted her corporate role quietly, assigning key responsibilities to her COO. There were rumors, of course. The press speculated about her retreat from leadership, but Eliza ignored it all. Then came the setback. One Monday morning, as she was preparing to pick Abby up for an art exhibit, she received a call from Janelle. Abby had fallen ill. Nothing serious, just a fever. But her energy had dipped and the doctor advised bed rest. Eliza offered to come by anyway, to sit with her, maybe read. The shelter director declined. It's best to give her space right now, they said. We'll keep you posted. The next day, another call. Abby's fever had risen. She was dehydrated. She was being taken to urgent care. Eliza didn't wait for permission. She drove herself across the city, parked illegally outside the clinic, and demanded to be let in. The nurse hesitated at first, unsure. But Abby's condition, though not critical, was clearly distressing. She lay curled on a narrow hospital bed, cheeks flushed, breathing shallow. Her arms were wrapped around Admiral buttons like a lifeline. Eliza sat beside her and took her hand gently. It was hot to the touch. I'm here, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. Abby's eyes fluttered open for a moment, then closed again. She didn't speak, but her grip tightened, just slightly. Eliza stayed the whole night. She refused to leave the chair. When Abby cried in her sleep, she hummed lullabies. When the IV beeped, she summoned nurses. When the sun rose through pale blue curtains, she was still holding that tiny hand. At one point, as Abby slept more peacefully, a nurse came in with a clipboard and asked, "Are you her guardian?" Eliza looked down at Abby, at her flushed cheeks and tangled hair. "No," she said softly. "Not yet." She remained in the hospital until Abby was stable. When it was time to transfer her back to the shelter, Eliza rode with her in the van, hand in hand, silent. The staff didn't object. That evening, back in the shelter common room, Eliza helped tuck Abby into bed. Before she left, Abby looked up, her voice hoarse. "Are you still my mama?" Eliza knelt beside her. "If you'll have me," she said, "I'd be honored to be." Abby didn't reply with words. She reached out, pulled Eliza's hand to her chest, and held it there. Eliza stayed until she fell asleep. As she left, Janelle approached her in the hallway. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. "Most people visit once, maybe twice. They bring toys. You brought time. That's what she needed most." Eliza didn't respond immediately. She looked back once more, then nodded. "She gave it to me first." Outside, the wind had picked up. The city lights flickered in the haze. Eliza pulled her coat tighter and walked to her car with a heart that, for the first time in years, didn't feel like glass. It felt alive, bruised, imperfect, but beating for something that wasn't profit, prestige, or performance. It was beating for a little girl named Abby, and the one quiet truth that now guided every step forward. She wasn't trying to save a child. The child had saved her first. The first snow of the season fell quietly over the hills just beyond the city, blanketing rooftops and tree branches in gentle white. The air was crisp with the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the sky above the cabin glowed in the silver light of a low winter sun. Here, far removed from glass towers and marble lobbies, life moved slower, softer. In a modest cottage tucked between a grove of cedar trees, the world Eliza Hart had once known felt like a distant echo, an echo that no longer called to her. The kitchen was alive with warmth. The scent of cinnamon and simmering apples drifted through the air as Eliza stirred a pot of stew on the stove. Her sleeves were rolled up to the elbows. A dusting of flour marked her cheek, and her once meticulously styled hair was pulled back in a loose, practical bun. The marble countertops and cold steel appliances of her former penthouse had been replaced by wood grain and hand-thrown ceramic. Behind her, a chalkboard calendar hung crooked on the wall, covered in uneven handwriting and star-shaped stickers. On the counter sat a mason jar filled with markers, a stack of coloring books, and an unfinished snow globe project drying beside a bowl of peeled carrots. Charles was at the dining table, carving details into a miniature wooden rocking horse with quiet focus. His hands, worn and capable, moved slowly over the smooth curves of the wood. They had met properly during one of the Foundation's earliest site visits, a man with calloused fingers and a calm voice who repaired play structures and patched roof shingles at the shelter where Eliza spent most of her volunteer hours. His presence had become a steady rhythm in their lives, an echo of something grounding and strong. He wasn't loud. He wasn't grand. He was consistent. And that, Eliza had come to understand, was what most people, especially small ones, needed most. The front door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air and the shrill voice of laughter. Abby burst in, cheeks pink from the cold, glitter tangled in her curls, and paint smudged across the sleeves of her jacket. She held a drawing above her head like a prize. "Mama! Papa! Look what I made!" she cried, dropping her mittens in the hallway and racing into the kitchen. She waved the picture dramatically. It showed a house with stars on the roof, a big golden moon above, and 3 stick figures holding hands beneath it. The stars had been drawn with silver crayon and layered with thick swirls of glue and glitter. At the bottom, in shaky but determined letters, was written, "Our home. Magic inside." Eliza crouched, catching her in a warm hug, then took the drawing and examined it like a treasure map. "It's beautiful," she said, smiling through her awe. "And you're right. It is magic." Charles leaned over from the table, brushing a speck of glitter off Abby's nose. "Definitely our best Christmas yet," he said with a soft chuckle. The foundation they had built together. One More Day had grown quietly but steadily. Its name had come from Abby's very first words to Eliza. Just one day. It now served dozens of families across the county. They provided warm meals, clothing, shelter, and emotional support to children and single parents caught in the fractures of a system that often moved too slow or not at all. The organization ran out of a renovated barn near the edge of the property. Volunteers came and went, but Eliza and Charles were the constant center. They met with social workers, coordinated housing transitions, helped with school supplies, built bunk beds, and cooked large pots of soup on rainy nights. But their favorite part, what grounded them, was home. Abby had started preschool in September. Every morning she marched up the wooden steps of the school building with her handmade backpack and a painted lunchbox. Her teacher, Miss Farrell, often told Eliza during pickup, "That girl has more imagination than half the faculty combined." Abby proudly told anyone who'd listen that her mama read her fairy tales every night and her papa made toys for her school. The routine of their life was not glamorous, but it shimmered with quiet joys. There were no private jets or luxury suites, but there were marshmallows roasted over fire pits, morning pancakes shaped like snowmen, and forts made of blankets and couch cushions. Charles taught Abby how to whittle soap with a plastic spoon. Eliza taught her to write her name in cursive. They watched snow fall from inside a sunroom filled with books, and on clear nights they laid out blankets and counted stars until their noses turned red and their fingers went numb. The anniversary of their first day together came quietly. It was Christmas Eve again. The 3 of them bundled into their old truck Abby in her red coat, slightly too small now, but still her favorite, and drove back to the same park where it had all begun. The city looked almost the same. The trees were strung with lights, music played softly from hidden speakers, and families bustled through the square with laughter and scarves trailing behind them. They walked slowly, hand in hand, past the bench where Eliza had once sat alone with her coffee and a life too perfectly controlled. Abby's gloves sparkled as she tugged on both their hands. "Can we spend every day together forever?" she asked, looking up at them with eyes full of that same hope she had carried a year ago. Eliza looked at Charles. Charles looked at Eliza. Their fingers tightened around hers in perfect synchrony. "Forever and ever," they said. Abby stopped, wrapped her arms around their legs, and tilted her head back with a smile that glowed. "I don't have a mama," she said softly, echoing her words from a year ago. "But now I have Mama Eliza, and it's forever." Eliza knelt, tears rising quickly but silently. "Yes, sweetheart, forever." They stood like that for a long moment, surrounded by the warmth of the crowd and the hush of falling snow. The park shimmered with light, and in the quiet of that evening, their family stood whole, not by blood, not by plan, but by choice. That night, after a simple dinner and hot cocoa by the fire, Eliza stepped out onto the porch. Snow fell in slow spirals, touching her skin like soft punctuation marks. The sky above her glittered. Behind her, the cottage windows glowed with amber light. The laughter of Abby and the sound of Charles humming from the kitchen mixed with the creak of old wood and the comfort of memory. Charles joined her a few minutes later, wrapping a wool scarf around her shoulders. He didn't say anything at first. They just stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the forest settle into quiet. "Still adjusting to country life?" he asked eventually, a playful note in his voice. Eliza smiled, her gaze still fixed on the sky. "I've burned 5 loaves of bread, ruined a birdhouse, and managed to glue my eyelashes together. But I've never been happier." He chuckled, reached into his coat, and pulled out a small wooden box. It was simple, handcrafted from cherry wood, smooth and warm in the palm. He handed it to her without ceremony, just a quiet offering. Eliza opened it and found a ring resting inside, a circle of carved wood, dark and elegant, with no stone, no gold, just the imprint of intention. She looked up at him. Charles knelt on one knee in the snow. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were steady. "You're not the miracle I asked for," he said. "You're the miracle I didn't know I needed. Will you be my wife?" "Akom." She dropped to her knees beside him, laughing through tears, snow soaking through her jeans. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's build this life. Not perfect, but ours." From the window, Abby's face appeared, wide-eyed and full of wonder. When she saw them in the snow, she squealed, her little voice muffled through the glass. "Mama said yes!" The house glowed brighter than ever that night, as if the love inside had spilled into every corner and cracked surface. There were no secrets now, no reservations, just 3 hearts, one small, one scarred, and one slowly healing beating in quiet harmony. In the following days, life continued its ordinary pace, but it was colored with something extraordinary. Charles continued his woodworking, helping renovate community centers and shelters. Eliza fully stepped away from her corporate past, though she occasionally gave lectures at women's leadership forums, always ending with the same slide: a drawing of a house with stars on the roof. Abby's drawing. Abby herself flourished. She grew taller, bolder, kinder. She made friends easily, painted constellations on her bedroom ceiling, and insisted Admiral Buttons needed a sweater. She never forgot where she had come from, but she no longer feared where she was going. One evening, as the family read stories beneath a quilt sewn by one of the shelter moms, Eliza turned a page and paused. Abby was curled at her side, eyes drooping. Charles sat in his chair nearby, reading quietly. The fire cracked. "Do you remember," Eliza asked softly, "the day you told me you didn't have a mama?" Abby nodded sleepily. "I never told you this," Eliza said, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "But that day, you gave me a family too." Abby didn't answer, already halfway to dreams, but a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, slow, and endless. And inside the little house with stars on the roof, love folded its arms around them. quiet, lasting forever. If this story meant something to you, make sure to subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and check out more videos on our channel. Thanks for watching.